Welcome to AETO playthrough video number 2. This follows on from the ground combat example of play. Today I thought I'd go through a naval operation to show you how the naval rules work in the game. It's probably one of the more involved processes. I think I've got it down now, so I thought it would be good to share it. So, going back to our, as previously covered, sequence of play, a monthly turn starts with the weather phase, and we're going to play a March turn, which means there's a 50-50 chance of either winter weather or mud weather. And for the sake of argument, we're going to say it's a winter turn. So that means that in the severe weather area, which you'll see is just north of this dotted line, we've got the severe weather, and south of it we've got the mud weather. And there's a potential impact on aircraft for bad weather. So we look at the weather effects table, and you'll see that for the winter weather on the 6 or 7, you get half strength for the aircraft, or if it's worse than that, it could be half strength, half range, or even grounded. And for the mud area, where we've got in the moderate air zone, it's half strength on an 8 or a 9. So for this example of play, we're going to assume we've got half strength in both the moderate and the severe weather zones. So we're just going to put some markers out as a reminder. So we're half strength everywhere on the map. So we then move on to strategic warfare, which we covered last time. I won't go through it again. And now the naval and air phase. So the side with the initiative gets to choose who gets to move something first, and we'll stick with the Germans having the initiative. Let's just have a quick summary of the situation that you can see in Edinburgh. We've got a UK task force just in shot there, covered by a wing of Hurricane aircraft. We've got 3 bombers along the east coast of England, some Wellingtons, Very Battles, and some Hampton bombers. These first 2 have their bombing strength underlined, and the Hamptons don't. This will have an impact on air naval attacks, as we'll discuss later. There's a German task force in Hamburg. There's the Scharnhorst, 2 heavy cruisers, the Blucher and the Hipper, I think. Yeah, and also a squadron of destroyers. And in Kiel we've got some E-boats and some more destroyers. And in Denmark, which is previously conquered, we've got stationed some Junker 88 fighter bombers. And just up here there are some FW-190s, primarily in that position to cover Berlin, which is just off to the left here, and also they can reach Düsseldorf and Frankfurt from there. So they're there to counter the strategic bombing threat, but they're currently uncommitted, so could be used in this example of play. Germans want to go first because, if I just slide this down a little bit, you'll see these are the straits between Denmark and Sweden. Allied submarines can infiltrate these on a 1, 2 or 3, that's why there are 3 dots, and they can get to the iron ore interdiction path in fair weather and mud weather. And because they know that the weather's on the turn, it's March this turn, there could be Allied submarines attempting that particular journey. So they're going to go first before the subs get a chance to move, and they're going to drop off, they're going to move out of Kiel. We won't bother trying to spot them because there's only one counter and you can see what's there. I'm not using a task force. And they're just going to drop a unit off in each, and that'll add a -1 onto the infiltration attempt of the Straits. You can put more in there, but a 6 is always a success, and they have no more than those 2 to spare at the moment. Then play passes back to the Allied player, who will leave the port of Edinburgh with the task force. As he leaves the port, he has to announce that to the German, and that triggers an air recon opportunity in the port. The only aircraft that can reach Edinburgh is the Junker 88s, 2, 4, 6, 9 away. And if we look at the air recon table, we'll see at a range of 9 you need a 9+, and we have a +1 because it's a coastal hex. So roll the dice, and we get a 7. +1's 8. It's not enough. The task force, it doesn't spend any movement points to do that because it started in the hex. Let's just move this pan back a little bit. We don't need to look at the Straits anymore. So task force sails into a large sea area. That's cost you 3 movement points in total. You can move anywhere within this region. If you move into a second large sea area, you'll pay 3 for that one as well. So these will just pay the 3. That could trigger another recon from the same unit, because each air unit can attempt a recon on each moving task force or naval unit for every hex or large sea area which it enters. So it gets a second opportunity. When it enters there, it's going to wait for a little bit. It's going to keep on sailing to this hex, and when it gets into that hex, they're going to try again. It's even worse than last time. That then fails. You'll also notice though that the task force positioned itself within 4 hexes of the Hurricanes in Edinburgh, so they're still covered by the 4 hex interception range. So if that air recon had been successful, then if these fighter bombers, or indeed other bombers, chose to attack this, they would have been covered by the fighters. So probably best not to tangle with those, but as it was, they weren't spotted anyway, so attacking is not an option. Play goes back to the Germans, who now decide they've got this opportunity to break out because of the poorer weather in both zones. So Task Force 3 now exits the port of Hamburg, which triggers an air recon. And there are 3 air units that can all reach Hamburg. So the closest one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 away, which is an 8+. You get a +1 for each additional aircraft, so that's a +2, and +1 because of it's a coastal hex. So that's an easy spot. At which point the German then has to give a flotilla sighting report. So in secret, he would roll a dice. Let's say he got a 2. And if we look at the chart, you'll see it says you've got to give the number of ships plus or minus 25%, but you don't have to make a distinction between named and unnamed ships. So we've only got 4 ships here. So he's just going to tell the Allies that there are 3 ships of non-defined size in that task force. Right. So bearing that in mind, the task force then moves into the large sea area, spending 3 movement points. Now that means that it is eligible to be air recon again. But if you want to attack a task force when it moves into a large sea area, first of all you've got to get a successful air recon, and then you attack. What you can't do is do the recon in the first hex and then wait for a later hex in that same large sea area. So your opportunity is at the time when you make that successful air recon. It goes away once it goes into another hex. And seeing these FW-190s, which have an interception range out to 4, still covered in this hex, there's no real point in the Allies trying to do their second recon attempt in that hex. As the task force moves away, it enters this hex. Now is the opportunity for them to do the air recon. So similar to what it was before, 1, 2, 3, but now we're only 6 away. So being only 6 away, we need a 7 or more. We've got 2 additional aircraft, so that's +2, and we've also got a modifier because it was previously spotted in the same phase. They had some prior knowledge of this naval movement. So we'll roll, get an 8, and that is another spot. And that triggers the option to do an air naval attack, which we will do. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the Wellingtons behind, and the reason for that is they want to have something else which could spot if this naval task force moves into another area. And also, in poor weather, the Wellingtons, all bombers in poor weather have their attack strength halved, but if it's an underlying strength, it's actually halved again. So these Wellingtons would only actually have a single attack, and they're also underlined, so they only get a +1. So they're not that useful attacking. Quite good for spotting, but not that useful for attacking naval targets. Similarly for the battles that wouldn't even get a single roll. But there are, in this Task Force 1, there are 2 aircraft carriers which have some Seafires and some Swordfish, and they are within range. So actually, Hamptons will fly from here, from Hull, and the Seafires and the Swordfish will take off with the same target. Now you'll notice that the Junker 88s have got a range of 10, so their interception range is half, because remember it's 4 or half of the range, whichever is the greater. So they could intercept one of these on the way to the target, but they decide to wait until they all get to the target. They then intercept. And before we have any air naval, we have to resolve the air-to-air combat. So, what's the biggest threat? Well, it's half air strength. So naval air, the end in the top left corner, these units will get a +3 when they attack a named naval target. The ones without the underline, just the straight bombers, will get a +2. But don't forget, these are all halved for bad weather, and when you're halved for bad weather, you round down. So these have got 2 attacks, and these have only got 1. So what's going to happen is that the Seafires are going to take on an escorting role. So the fighter bombers are going to attack the Hamptons because they see them as the biggest threat. the swordfish are going to keep their ordnance because they want to drop some torpedoes, and the sea fires will try and take out the Junker 88s. What you need to notice as well is that naval air assets have only got one side, they're blank on the other side, which means they can only take part in the first round of air combat. They can hang around for the second if they want to drop bombs, but they can't actually do any intercepting or any escorting. So in this combat we've got half air, so we've got 2 for the Junker 88, plus 1, 3, minus 0, target of 3, get a 1. Hamptons are hit and aborted. They're kept in the hex for now, but they're not going to take any part in the air naval attack. Sea fires, we'll have the escort, they get a plus 1, so they're halved to 1, but they get a plus 1 because they're attacking a bomber, sorry, a fighter that was attacking a bomber, so they're back to 2, plus 2 for the quality is 4, minus 1 for the target quality, 6, that's a miss. And it also means that these guys now don't take any part in the second round. Second round comes, fighter bombers can now try and engage the swordfish. So similarly they are 2, because the weather, plus 1's 3. Got a 5, so they've missed. This means that the swordfish get through the escorts, or the interceptors, and they can now attack the task force, at which point the Germans show what's in the task force. Now when you have naval combat, you roll 2d6, so you add on your strength, so in the case of the Scharnhorst it would be a 3, and you've got to equal or surpass the defensive target, with the addition that a 12 is always a hit. Now for an air naval attack, a 12 is always a hit as well, but you get to add the air to naval DRM to reach that target of 12. So don't forget, the naval air get a plus 3 onto their die roll. So if they want to target the Scharnhorst, they would actually hit the Scharnhorst with a 9, because a 12 is still counted as a hit. But what they want to do is they want to attack, they're going to go for one of these heavy cruisers, go for the slightly easier shot. So the target is defensive 9 for this, so they're going to go for the hipper. Release some torpedoes, and they get an 8. So 8 plus 3 is 11, which is more than enough to damage the hipper. So the hipper slipped over onto its damaged slower side, and that ends the attacks. At this point, the task force can keep moving. So it moves into this hex. Having moved into this hex, we can now do another spotting. So we've got our 2 aircraft on the east coast, 2, 3, 6 away. And so 6 away, we go to the air recon table. It's a 7 or more, plus 1 for the extra aircraft, and plus 1 because it was previously spotted. So 9. So it's been spotted again. You can, I mean, sometimes you can mark, if you're going through, you can mark a particular task force that's been spotted if it helps you to remember the status. Now it's got into this next big sea zone, it is eligible to be to a naval reactive interception. So British Task Force 1, that's in this large sea area, has got a reactive range of anything that enters this large sea zone, plus all of the adjoining or the adjacent coastal hexes. So it's allowed to now attempt a reactive. I should have actually put a standby marker. When you move your task force, if it moves half or less of the movement points, you put a standby marker on it, which means it's not finished yet. It can still do other things. So it's still able to do operations until it's managed to successfully conduct a reactive naval interception. So now it's going to try and intercept this task force. What the Germans would have done, they would have left the Hipper behind, because that's going to slow the group down, and they're trying to rely on their speed. These are quite quick to get through any danger, so the Hipper will drop off there. That, if you might remember from the sequence of play from last time, in the naval end phase, this will move back to port, probably back to Kiel or somewhere, major port, to assist in the repairs. So now we've only got 3 ships that moved into here. So this task force now tries a reactive interception, and what you do is you divide up the fleet. Let's just move this air out of the way for a minute. This is what's in this task force. Got 2 carriers, the Duke of York, Berwick, Cornwall heavy cruisers and some destroyers, and we've also got the Nelson, King George V, London heavy cruiser, the light cruiser squadron, and 2 destroyer squadrons. So as this task force moves, the trick with aircraft carriers, all these other land-based air stay aloft. These have an aloft status, so they're going to be there until the end of the first air step, when they'll both land and be able to do something again for the second air step. These naval air that were based on the carriers, once the carrier moves 1 hex in this task force, they actually collect the naval air back onto the carriers. So by the time they do their naval interception attempt, they have a full complement of air. So we now have to do a naval interception. So we've split our group into, or our task force into 2 groups. This increases the chance of a group being successful, and they're done in order of speed. So the one on the right, the slowest ship there, is the Duke of York at 38, and in this other group on the left, the Nelson's 34. So the faster group is on the right. And what you do is you look at these naval modifiers, and as you go down through these, you'll see the target is to get to a 7 for a successful interception. We've got 2 groups, so that's a +2. The target moved within 2. It did. It was within 2 when it triggered the reactive interception. So that's +3. It's not a coastal hex. It's not doing amphibious. It is within range of a land-based air. So that is 4. It was also successfully reconnoitred. That's why we kept back our Wellingtons and from the previous engagement. So that's what, +5. We're in a winter weather in a severe zone, so it's a +3, and there is inclement weather, which is a +2, isn't it, overall? It's a net +2. So we need to get a 5 or more for a successful interception. So what we would do is, you start off with the fastest group, and I'll roll, and it is a 6. So this means that this group can attempt to now fight the target. However, these guys are quicker, and you're allowed to outrun one of the attacking groups in each naval combat. So these are going to try and outpace the 1st British task force, or 1st British group from this task force. However, planes are faster than ships, so they still get to do their strikes before that's announced. So if these guys can actually damage one of these ships and slow it down, these will not be able to evade the rest of the group. Now, for the sake of argument, we'll just say that these strikes were unsuccessful. They're only going to get 1 roll each because it's still bad weather, and we'll say they went for the Blucher and they rolled a 5 both times or something. So 5 plus 3 would be 8. So for the sake of showing you some combat with the second group, we'll say that these guys had their air attacks, but they both failed. Then we get on to the second group. They would roll. They get a 5, that's a 7, so that's also a success. Now, even though they're slower than the target, you're only allowed to outpace one of the attacking groups. So now you have to go into combat. So what you do for naval combat, you have the first round where you fire in order of gun size. So the Nelson would fire first with a 5. They can choose any target they like. Then the King George V would fire. Again, it could target anybody, but not one that has already been targeted until everything has been targeted at least once. So you're firing with a 2d6, you're adding on your gun strength, which is 5 for the Nelson, and you're trying to hit, you're trying to equal or surpass the defence. So let's just move this camera down slightly, I'll get to see that a bit better. Okay. So let's just do that. So let's say that the Nelson's going to target the Scharnhorst. That's a 5. So that's a miss. Then King George V will target the Blucher. So we've got an 11 plus 4 is 15. That's easily hit on the Blucher. If you hit with the doubles, so for example, if I'd rolled a double 4 there, that would have been a hit, and it would have been hit with doubles. That counts as a magazine hit and would destroy the ship outright. Then the ships with a strength of 3 would fire. So now it's the turn of the Scharnhorst. It knows it's got to get an 11 or 12 to hit the Nelson or the King George. It's going to go for the London heavy cruiser with a +3. So that's a 5. So that's missed the London. Okay, and then we do the 2s. Now these are done in sequence, so the fact that the Blucher was damaged before we got a chance to fire means it's now considered to be a ship of strength 1. So the London would now fire, but the Blucher would have to wait until the round where all the 1 strength naval units fired. That is to say, it would fire at the same time as these light cruisers. The London now gets to fire. It can't target these two because they've both been shot at already, so it must go for the destroyers. 4, that's a miss. Okay, so then we fire the 1s. The Blucher will fire at the light cruisers, for argument's sake, and that's a 6, that's a miss. And then the light cruisers have now got a choice because all these have been fired at already, so they'll have another crack at the Blucher, and that is in fact a 12. So shame they didn't target the Scharnhorst there, because that would have been a hit. So the Blucher's sunk. Then we have a torpedo round where any destroyers with torpedoes, which is the number in brackets, these can now target named ships. So these destroyers will now target the London, and they get a +2 because that's the torpedo rating, and that is a 8 + 2 is 10, so that damages the London. And then the British destroyers can only go for the Scharnhorst because that's the only named ship, so they need to roll close but no cigar. They got an 11, they did a 12. And then you have a final round of to continue. The final round of surface gunnery now takes place. This is not sequenced like the first naval round. Everything gets a chance to fire once, so this is all sort of simultaneous. And you would resolve this, let's say for argument's sake the Scharnhorst gets hit by the Nelson or the King George V, and maybe the Scharnhorst would be able to sink the London in that final round, and that would end the naval combat. Pretty good news for the Allies. They'd be very happy with that trade-off. They've lost a heavy cruiser. They've taken some damage to the Hampton bombers, which is quite painful because they're very useful in this role. But they've managed to negate the threat that the Kriegsmarine were posing to get into the convoy routes. They've sunk one heavy cruiser, they've damaged another one, and if the Scharnhorst was damaged, it's not allowed to conduct any strategic warfare in its damaged state anyway, so that would also be forced to return to port. So, job done there, I think, for the Royal Navy. So I hope that's given you some idea as to how the various mechanics in the naval phase can unfold. I think you'll agree it's a pretty detailed system. I don't know anything else that gives this amount of historical flavour. It really works for me. I hope it's helped you, and maybe we'll see some more games of AETO being played in 2021.